At the Pikes Peak Animal Shelter in Colorado Springs, volunteers thought they had seen every kind of heartbreak that comes with animal rescue work. But nothing had prepared them for what happened on that quiet Tuesday morning when Sarah Martinez walked through their doors. She was just looking for a therapy dog to help with her PTSD recovery, but when a 2-year-old German Shepherd named Ranger saw her face, his reaction was so intense and heartbreaking that it stopped everyone in their tracks. The young dog threw himself against his kennel bars, crying and howling with a desperation that seemed to pierce straight through to Sarah's soul. What neither Sarah nor the shelter staff knew was that this wasn't a case of love at first sight. It was a reunion 2 years in the making, involving a secret military operation, a life-saving rescue in Afghanistan, and a promise between soldiers that would change everything. Get ready for the incredible true story of how a bond forged in war survived against impossible odds, and how sometimes the most powerful healing comes from the unconditional love of an animal who never forgot. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been the best field veterinarian the 82nd Airborne Division had ever deployed to Afghanistan, but that was before the roadside bomb that shattered her left leg and left fragments in her memory that she was still trying to piece together 2 years later. At 32, the former Army captain now spent her days in physical therapy and counseling sessions at the Colorado Springs VA Medical Center, fighting battles that were harder to define than the ones she'd faced in combat. Sarah, you mentioned wanting to explore animal-assisted therapy, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, her PTSD counselor, said during their weekly session. Have you given any more thought to visiting the local shelters? Sometimes connecting with an animal can help unlock emotional pathways that traditional therapy can't reach. Sarah nodded, though the idea of committing to caring for another living being felt overwhelming when some days she could barely take care of herself. The nightmares had been getting worse lately, fragments of memories from her deployment that felt more like fever dreams than actual recollections. She remembered treating wounded soldiers, emergency surgeries in impossible conditions, and the constant sound of helicopters, but there were gaps, important gaps that her therapist said might return with time or might not return at all. The Pikes Peak Animal Shelter had been recommended by several other veterans in her support group, and Dr. Walsh had made some calls to arrange a private visit during a quieter time of day. Sarah drove her Honda Civic through the familiar streets of Colorado Springs, the Rocky Mountains rising dramatically in the distance, a view that usually brought her comfort but today only reminded her of the mountains of Afghanistan where everything had changed. Dr. Emily Chin, the shelter's director, met Sarah at the entrance with a warm smile and understanding eyes that suggested she'd worked with veterans before. We're honored to have you visit, Dr. Martinez. I know Dr. Walsh explained that you're looking for a potential therapy animal. We have several dogs that might be good candidates, but I want you to know there's no pressure. Sometimes it takes time to find the right match. The shelter was clean and well-maintained, with spacious kennels and dedicated areas for different types of animals. Sarah could hear the usual chorus of barks and whines that came with housing dozens of dogs waiting for their forever homes, but as they walked through the main corridor, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose and familiarity that reminded her why she'd become a veterinarian in the first place. Most of our dogs are local surrenders or strays, Dr. Chen explained as they passed kennels housing everything from elderly labs to energetic pit bull mixes. But we do have a few special cases. There's one dog in particular that I think you should meet, though I should warn you, his story is a bit unusual. They stopped in front of a kennel housing a magnificent German Shepherd who appeared to be about 2 years old. His coat was the classic black and tan coloring, with intelligent dark eyes and perfectly erect ears that gave him an alert, noble appearance. The nameplate on his kennel read Ranger, and according to the information card, he had been at the shelter for only 3 weeks. He's beautiful, Sarah said, studying the young dog who was lying calmly in his kennel, seemingly uninterested in the visitors passing by. What makes his story unusual? Dr. Chin hesitated for a moment. He was brought to us by some military personnel from Fort Carson. They said they'd arranged for his transport from overseas, but they were vague about the details. Ranger's been through quarantine and has all his health certifications, but he's been withdrawn, almost like he's waiting for someone. As if responding to their conversation, Ranger lifted his head and looked directly at Sarah. For a moment, their eyes met through the kennel bars, and Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a recognition that she couldn't quite place, like trying to remember a dream that felt important but remained frustratingly out of reach. The moment Sarah Martinez stepped closer to Ranger's kennel, the German Shepherd's entire demeanor transformed in a way that left Dr. Emily Chin speechless. The calm, withdrawn dog who had barely shown interest in humans for 3 weeks suddenly exploded into action, launching himself against the kennel door with such force that the metal frame shook. "Ranger, easy," Dr. Chin called out, but the dog's reaction was beyond anything she had ever witnessed in 15 years of shelter work. Ranger wasn't showing aggression, he was showing desperate, overwhelming recognition. His dark eyes were fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that bordered on frantic, and the sounds coming from his throat were unlike any typical dog vocalizations. The German Shepherd was crying. Not whining or barking, but producing deep, guttural sounds that could only be described as sobs of joy mixed with heartbreak. His powerful body pressed against the kennel bars as he stretched his neck toward Sarah, trying to reach her with desperate determination. His tail wagged so hard his entire rear end was moving, but his eyes never left her face. This has never happened before," Dr. Chin said, watching in amazement as Ranger continued his emotional display. "It's like he knows you." Sarah felt her knees go weak as waves of emotion washed over her. Emotion she couldn't explain or understand. Looking at Ranger's face, something deep in her mind stirred, like trying to grasp a memory that was just out of reach. The dog's eyes held such intelligence and familiarity that it was almost human in its intensity. Can I go in with him?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chin hesitated. "He's been gentle with our staff, but his reaction to you is so intense. Are you sure you're comfortable?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure of anything except that this dog somehow knew her, and she needed to understand how. Dr. Chin unlocked the kennel door, and Ranger immediately pushed through the opening, but instead of running or jumping, he stopped directly in front of Sarah and sat, his body trembling with barely contained emotion. Slowly, Sarah knelt down to Ranger's level. The moment she extended her hand, the German Shepherd gently pressed his head against her palm, closing his eyes as if savoring a touch he had been longing for. Then, with careful deliberation, he moved closer and rested his head against her chest, directly over her heart. The effect on Sarah was immediate and overwhelming. As Ranger's warm weight settled against her, images began flashing through her mind, fragments of memories that had been locked away since her injury. She saw herself in military fatigues, kneeling in dusty ground, bottle-feeding a tiny German Shepherd puppy. She remembered the feel of soft puppy fur and the weight of a small, warm body falling asleep in her lap. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her hands instinctively moving to stroke Ranger's fur. "I remember you. I remember feeding you with a bottle. You were so tiny." Ranger's response was immediate. He looked up at her face and began making soft whimpering sounds, as if he was trying to tell her his own memories of their time together. His tail never stopped wagging, but his eyes held depths of emotion that seemed almost human in their complexity. Dr. Chin watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, though she didn't yet understand what she was witnessing. "Sarah, are you saying you know this dog?" I think so. But I don't understand how he got here. The last thing I remember." Sarah's voice trailed off as more memories began surfacing, fragments of a story she was only beginning to remember. "There was an explosion. I was evacuated. But I don't remember what happened to." She looked down at Ranger, who was still pressed against her as if he never intended to let her go again. "What happened to him?" As Sarah sat on the floor of the kennel with Ranger pressed against her side, Dr. Emily Chen made an urgent phone call to the military contact who had brought the German Shepherd to the shelter 3 weeks earlier. What she learned during that conversation would begin to unravel a story that had been 2 years in the making. "Dr. Chen, this is Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson," the voice on the phone said. "Is everything all right with Ranger? We've been hoping someone would connect with him." "Sergeant Thompson, I have a veteran here named Sarah Martinez, and Ranger's reaction to her is extraordinary. She seems to have some memory of him, but it's fragmented. Can you tell me anything about his background?" The pause on the other end of the line was long enough that Dr. Chin wondered if the connection had been lost. When Sergeant Thompson finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Dr. Martinez is there?" "Sarah Martinez, former captain, 82nd Airborne Veterinarian." "Yes, that's her." "Sergeant, what's going on?" "Ma'am, we've been looking for Dr. Martinez for 2 years. Ranger has been waiting for her for 2 years." While Dr. Chin spoke on the phone, Sarah found herself lost in a flood of returning memories triggered by Ranger's presence. She remembered now, the tiny German Shepherd puppy who had been found orphaned near their forward operating base in Afghanistan. His mother had been killed by shrapnel from a mortar attack, and Sarah had volunteered to bottle feed and care for the weeks-old puppy during her off-duty hours. She remembered naming him Ranger because of his courage. Even as a tiny puppy, he had shown no fear of the helicopters, vehicles, and constant noise of military operations. She remembered how he had slept in her small quarters, how he had become the unofficial mascot of her medical unit, how caring for him had become the bright spot in each difficult day of treating wounded soldiers. "You used to sleep on my cot," Sarah whispered to Ranger, who responded by shifting closer and resting his chin on her knee. "You would cry if I left you alone, so I started carrying you in my jacket during rounds." The memories were coming back in waves now, some clear, others still frustratingly vague. She remembered Ranger growing from a tiny puppy into a young dog, remembered teaching him basic commands, remembered how he had learned to stay quiet during medical procedures so he wouldn't interfere with her work treating wounded soldiers. But there was still a gap, a crucial missing piece between her last clear memory of Ranger as a 6-month-old puppy and the roadside bomb that had ended her deployment and left her with partial memory loss. Dr. Chin approached with her phone in hand, her expression showing excitement mixed with concern. "Sarah, there's someone who wants to talk to you. He says he can explain how Ranger got here." Sarah took the phone with trembling hands. "This is Sarah Martinez." "Dr. Martinez, this is Sergeant Mike Thompson. I served with you at FOB Lightning." "Ma'am, I can't tell you how glad I am that you found each other again." "Sergeant Thompson, I remember you. You were with the 3rd Infantry. But I don't understand. How is Ranger here? What happened after I was evacuated?" "Ma'am, that's a long story and I think it's better told in person. Are you free this afternoon? Because there are some people who've been waiting 2 years to see you again, and there's something we've been keeping safe for you all this time." Sarah looked down at Ranger, who was watching her face intently as if he understood every word of the conversation. His tail wagged when their eyes met, and she realized that whatever she was about to learn, this loyal dog had been carrying the memory of their bond through circumstances she couldn't yet imagine. "I'll be there," she said, knowing that the missing pieces of her memory and her heart were about to be restored. Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson met Sarah and Dr. Chen at a small cafe near Fort Carson, and he wasn't alone. 3 other soldiers from Sarah's former unit were waiting at a corner table, their faces showing a mixture of nervousness and excitement that made Sarah's chest tight with emotion she couldn't yet understand. "Doc Martinez," said Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, standing to shake her hand. "It's so good to see you again. We wasn't sure, after everything that happened." Sarah studied their faces, fragments of memory slowly connecting. She remembered these men. They had been frequent patients at her medical station, and she had treated everything from combat injuries to routine illnesses. But there was something else, something about the way they were looking at her that suggested a deeper connection. "Gentlemen, I have to be honest, my memory of the last few months before my injury is still pretty fragmented. I remember Ranger as a puppy and I remember all of you, but there's a gap I can't quite fill." Sergeant Thompson nodded understandingly. "Doc, what's the last thing you remember clearly?" Sarah closed her eyes trying to focus. "I remember Ranger was about 6 months old. He had learned to stay quiet during medical procedures and he was getting bigger. I remember being worried about what would happen to him when my deployment ended." She opened her eyes. "And then everything gets fuzzy until I woke up in Germany after the bombing." The soldiers exchanged meaningful glances before Sergeant Thompson continued. "Doc, Ranger wasn't 6 months old when you were injured. He was almost a year old. You cared for him for 8 months, not 3. And in those last few months before the bombing, something important happened." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a video that made her breath catch. On the small screen, she watched herself in military fatigues, working with a nearly full-grown Ranger who was performing complex tasks, carrying medical supplies, alerting to incoming helicopters, even helping comfort wounded soldiers by providing emotional support during treatment. "You trained him, Doc," said Specialist Kevin Park, speaking for the first time. "Not just basic commands but real medical assistance work. Ranger became part of your medical team. He saved lives." As Sarah watched the video, more memories began surfacing. She remembered teaching Ranger to carry her medical bag, remembered how he had learned to sense when incoming wounded soldiers were arriving by helicopter, remembered how his calm presence had helped traumatized soldiers relax during treatment. "But the most important thing," Sergeant Thompson said, his voice growing serious, "was what you made us promise 3 days before the bombing." "What promise?" "You said you'd been having nightmares about something happening to you, and you were worried about what would happen to Ranger if you couldn't take care of him anymore. You made us swear that if anything happened to you, we would make sure Ranger got back to the States and found a good home." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't remember that. You were scared, document. Not of combat, you never showed fear about that. But you were terrified that Ranger would end up abandoned or put down if something happened to you." So you made us promise that we would move heaven and earth to get him home. Specialist Park continued the story. When the bomb went off and you were evacuated, Ranger went crazy. He knew something was wrong. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, kept trying to find you. We realized that your worst fear was about to come true. The Army was going to classify him as abandoned property. So we made a decision, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez added. We decided to honor our promise to you. It took us almost 2 years, but we found a way to bring Ranger home. We've been taking care of him, training him, keeping him ready for the day we could find you again. Sarah looked around the table at these men who had risked their careers and spent their own money to honor a promise made to a wounded comrade. You brought him here for me? Sergeant Thompson smiled. Doc, that dog never forgot you for a single day. And neither did we. The reunion at Sarah's small apartment in Colorado Springs that evening was unlike anything Dr. Emily Chen had witnessed in her years of animal rescue work. Ranger moved through Sarah's living space with the confidence of coming home, investigating every corner as if reacquainting himself with scents and memories that had been locked away for 2 years. He remembers, Sarah said in wonder, watching as Ranger went directly to her bedroom and lay down beside the bed in the exact position where a dog bed would naturally belong. How is that possible after all this time? Sergeant Thompson, who had helped transport Ranger and his belongings from the temporary housing where the soldiers had been caring for him, smiled as he watched the reunion unfold. Doc, that dog has been training for this moment every day for 2 years. We kept up his medical assistant's work, maintained his commands, even kept a piece of your clothing so he wouldn't forget your scent. As if to demonstrate his point, Ranger approached Sarah's coffee table where she had set down her purse and medical bag from her current work at a local veterinary clinic. Without any command, the German Shepherd gently picked up the bag and brought it to Sarah, sitting in perfect position as he had been trained to do in Afghanistan. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, tears flowing freely now. You remember everything. Dr. Chin, who had stayed to help with the transition, was amazed by the seamless way Ranger integrated back into Sarah's life. It's like he never left. The bond between you two is extraordinary. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began happening. As Sarah and Ranger rebuilt their relationship, her PTSD symptoms began improving in ways that months of traditional therapy hadn't achieved. Ranger seemed to instinctively understand her triggers. When nightmares woke her up, he was immediately there, providing deep pressure therapy by lying across her chest. When crowds or loud noises caused her anxiety, he positioned himself as a protective barrier. It's unprecedented, Dr. Rebecca Walsh told Sarah during a therapy session 6 weeks after the reunion. Your progress has been remarkable. The nightmares have decreased by 80%, your anxiety levels are more manageable, and you're engaging socially in ways you haven't since your injury. But the healing wasn't one-sided. Ranger, who had been withdrawn and listless at the shelter, had transformed back into the confident, purposeful working dog he had been in Afghanistan. Dr. Chin visited regularly to check on the placement and was amazed by the change in both Sarah and Ranger. They're healing each other, she explained to her staff during a shelter meeting. Sarah is remembering not just her memories, but her sense of purpose and confidence. And Ranger has his mission back, taking care of the person he loves most. Sarah had returned to work part-time at the veterinary clinic, and with special permission, Ranger accompanied her as her certified therapy animal. The other veterinarians were amazed by his medical knowledge and intuitive understanding of animal care procedures. He's like having another veterinary technician, Dr. Amanda Foster, Sarah's supervisor, observed. He anticipates what you need, helps calm nervous animals, and seems to understand medical procedures in ways I've never seen in a dog. The most powerful moment came when Sarah visited the VA Medical Center to speak with other veterans about animal-assisted therapy. Ranger demonstrated his medical support skills, showing how he could detect the onset of anxiety attacks, provide mobility assistance, and even fetch emergency medications. This dog saved my life twice, Sarah told the group of veterans. Once in Afghanistan when caring for him gave me purpose during the darkest days of deployment, and again here at home when finding him again reminded me that healing is possible, that loyalty exists, and that some bonds are strong enough to survive anything. As she spoke, Ranger lay calmly beside her, occasionally looking up at her face with those intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand every word. His presence a living testament to the power of unconditional love and the extraordinary healing that can occur when broken hearts find each other again. 6 months after their reunion, Sarah Martinez and Ranger had become more than just a success story. They had become catalysts for change that rippled through the Colorado Springs veteran community and beyond. Their story had caught the attention of a CNN journalist researching military-animal bonds, and the subsequent feature story had generated hundreds of calls from veterans looking for similar therapy animal placements. Dr. Emily Chin found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't anticipated. "We've had inquiries from veterans across the country," she told Sarah during one of their regular check-ins. "Your story has inspired a program we're calling Forgotten Warriors, connecting military working dogs and therapy animals with veterans who need them." The program had already achieved remarkable results. Sergeant Thompson and his team had helped locate 3 other military dogs whose handlers had been wounded or killed in action, and the Pikes Peak Animal Shelter had partnered with the VA Medical Center to create a formal therapy animal training program specifically for veterans with PTSD. Sarah had become an unofficial spokesperson for the program, sharing her story at veteran events and working with Dr. Rebecca Walsh to develop new protocols for animal-assisted therapy. But it was the individual success stories that moved her most deeply. "Sarah, I want you to meet someone," Dr. Walsh said during what had become a monthly group therapy session for veterans with therapy animals. She introduced Marine Corps veteran Jessica Torres, who was accompanied by a beautiful Belgian Malinois named Apollo. "Jessica's story has some similarities to yours." Jessica, a former military police officer who had lost her leg to an IED in Iraq, had been matched with Apollo, a former bomb detection dog whose handler had been killed in the same attack that wounded Jessica. Like Sarah and Ranger, their reunion had been facilitated by fellow service members who refused to let a working partnership die with deployment. "Apollo remembers me from the base," Jessica explained, her hand resting on the Belgian Malinois who lay calmly beside her wheelchair. "We worked together for 6 months before the attack. When I woke up in Walter Reed, I thought I'd never see him again. But my squad leader spent 2 years getting him stateside." Sarah watched the interaction between Jessica and Apollo, seeing the same deep bond that she shared with Ranger. "How has it affected your recovery?" "Everything changed," Jessica said simply. "Apollo gives me purpose again. He needs me and I need him. We're both healing together." Dr. Walsh documented these partnerships with the rigor of formal research, and the results were compelling enough to attract attention from the Department of Veterans Affairs and military leadership. "What we're seeing is that these reunions aren't just emotionally satisfying, they're measurably therapeutic. Veterans with military animal partners show 60% better outcomes in PTSD treatment compared to traditional therapy alone." The success had also attracted media attention that brought unexpected opportunities. Sarah received a call from Dr. Patricia Kim, a researcher at Colorado State University's veterinary school, requesting permission to study Sarah and Ranger's relationship for a formal research project on human-animal bonds and trauma recovery. "Your partnership could help us develop better training protocols for therapy animals working with veterans," Dr. Kim explained. "We want to understand what makes military-animal bonds so particularly effective for PTSD treatment." Sarah agreed to participate, knowing that research based on her experience with Ranger could help other veterans find the healing they desperately needed. The study would involve regular sessions where researchers observed Sarah and Ranger's interactions, documented Ranger's responses to Sarah's therapy needs, and analyzed the neurochemical changes that occurred in both human and dog during their bonding activities. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the letter Sarah received from Afghanistan. Sergeant Thompson had arranged for her to correspond with soldiers currently deployed at FOB Lightning, where she and Ranger had first met. The current veterinary team had heard their story and wanted her to know that her legacy lived on. "Dr. Martinez," the letter read, "your story reminds us why our work matters. We have 3 orphan puppies here now, and we're caring for them the way you taught us animals deserve to be treated. Thank you for showing us that some bonds are worth fighting for." 1 year after their reunion, Sarah Martinez stood before a crowd of 200 people at the annual Colorado Springs Veterans Day ceremony, with Ranger sitting perfectly at her side in his official therapy dog vest. She had been invited to speak about the healing power of animal partnerships, but as she looked out at the audience of veterans, active military, and civilian supporters, she realized her story had become something much larger than she had ever imagined. "A year ago, I was a broken veteran struggling with PTSD and memory loss," Sarah began, her voice steady and strong. "I thought the best parts of my military service were lost forever. But sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the love that saves us has 4 legs and a tail." In the audience, she could see the faces of the program's success stories. Jessica Torres and Apollo sat in the front row, both showing remarkable progress. Behind them were 6 other veteran animal partnerships that had been formed through the Forgotten Warriors program, each representing a life transformed through the bond between human and animal. Sergeant Thompson and his team occupied a special section, having been formally recognized by the VA for their innovative approach to veteran care. Their determination to honor a promise made to a wounded comrade had accidentally created a model that was now being implemented at military bases and VA facilities across the country. Ranger didn't just help me remember my past, Sarah continued, reaching down to rest her hand on the German Shepherd's head. He helped me build a future I never thought possible. That future had exceeded everyone's expectations. Sarah had completed her PTSD treatment and returned to full-time work, but now she split her time between veterinary practice and serving as the program coordinator for Forgotten Warriors. The initiative had expanded to serve veterans nationwide and had successfully reunited 47 military working dogs with their handlers or other veterans in need. Dr. Emily Chin had transformed the Pikes Peak Animal Shelter into a regional center for therapy animal training, with Ranger serving as a mentor dog for other animals entering the program. He teaches them how to provide emotional support, Dr. Chin explained to visitors. It's like he understands his role in helping other dogs help other people. The research conducted by Colorado State University had yielded groundbreaking results. Dr. Patricia Kim's study of Sarah and Ranger's partnership had been published in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior and was being used to develop new protocols for military animal therapy programs worldwide. We documented neurochemical changes in both human and dog that suggest these bonds activate healing mechanisms we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Kim explained in her presentation. Sarah and Ranger's partnership has become the gold standard for therapeutic human-animal relationships. But for Sarah, the real measure of success was much simpler. As she concluded her Veterans Day speech, she knelt down beside Ranger, who immediately moved to provide the deep pressure therapy he had perfected for managing her anxiety. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the German Shepherd positioned himself perfectly, demonstrating the intuitive care that had saved both their lives. Ranger and I found each other in a war zone, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. We lost each other to circumstances beyond our control. But the love between a soldier and her dog proved stronger than trauma, stronger than time, and stronger than the distance between Afghanistan and home. As if understanding that this was his moment, Ranger looked up at Sarah with those intelligent dark eyes that had first recognized her in a shelter kennel, then turned to face the audience. His tail wagged once, a gesture that somehow seemed to encompass everything they had survived and overcome together. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but Sarah and Ranger only had eyes for each other, two survivors who had found their way home through the unbreakable bond between a soldier and her dog. If Sarah and Ranger's incredible journey from separation to healing touched your heart, remember that thousands of veterans and military animals are still searching for the connections that can transform their lives. Their story proves that the bonds forged in service are powerful enough to survive trauma, time, and any obstacle when people refuse to give up on those who served. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of military heroes, both human and animal, who remind us that loyalty, courage, and love are the strongest forces for healing. Like this video if you believe in the power of never giving up on those who served our country, and share it with someone who supports our veterans or works with military families. Have you ever witnessed the bond between a veteran and their service animal? Do you know a military family who could benefit from programs like Forgotten Warriors? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build a community that supports the healing and recognition our veterans deserve. Together, we can ensure that no veteran faces their battles alone, and no military animal is forgotten when their service ends. The courage that serves overseas deserves the same dedication when heroes come home.